Okay, hi guys, this is the next slide. This is a pretty short one, but I like this one. This is my favorite, this question of additional work, the use of marginal costing to discuss whether or not we can take on additional work. Again, you can't be thinking about taking on additional work if you're still trying to break even. Which means, again, we can only do this for a short period of time, and we must have traditionally covered our fixed costs. That's still the line of thinking. So we must only think, if you like, of our marginal cost or the variable cost. Right, so turn in your books, if you like, to page 396. You need to have your books with you and focus on this thing where it talks about when we accept additional work. So pause this if you're trying to find where you're going in your text, to page 396. And there are a couple of issues here, and when I say issues, a couple of key points here. And it says that once a business is profitable at its current level of output, to increase its profits, it can make, very first line of 396, it can make additional sales at a selling price above marginal cost. But if you like, below what it initially started selling the product for. Right, and that's what they refer to as absorption costing. So let's expand that. Let's expand that a little. And I think I gave you the example of a portion of chips, and I made that very clear. I'm going to stick to that for now. Imagine you had £1,000 as your rent. You had cleared this by Monday, Tuesday. You have the staff. Imagine your staff costs were actually fixed costs, and that's your rent. And you've done this Monday, Tuesday, you sell the thing. This is what your current absorption selling price. You're covering all your fixed costs. I mean, that's why it's so high, because you want it to be as high as possible initially, so we can get to break even as soon as possible. 2010, and then you have this contribution, if you like, of 10. You've sold 100 portions by Monday, Tuesday. Additional work says, after Monday, Tuesday, now that we've covered our fixed costs, can we take on an extra contract? Can we take on something else that's actually less than what's being offered? Someone comes to you and says to you, you know what, I'm willing to offer you, would you like to do a little contract for us? Can you supply 50 portions of chips and we'll give you £15 a portion? You're like, yes, of course. Because you know the cost of a portion of chips is 10 to you. This person is willing to give you 15. You're still making, if you like, a contribution of 5, even though it's not the 20 you had initially started with. The key point is, because what you're being offered is greater than the variable cost, you will take it, right? Because the people are just sitting around and not doing anything. So typically, before we can even make this type of decision, you must have spare capacity. So that's when we do this, and we can see this in the question. Let's just walk through. I'm going to walk through the question where it says worked example accepting additional work. I'm going to walk through that very quickly. It talks about the Wyvern Bike Company, and they produce 100 bikes a week, and they sell them for £200 each. And the costs are as for, they make 100 bikes. So I mean, to be fair, I don't even need to look at the big numbers. The marginal cost is 40 plus 50, right? That's the direct material, and that's the direct labor. So together, that's £90. So what am I talking about here? The if you like, the contribution right now is 110. That's what I'm making. That's my variable cost. That's my marginal cost. Variable, marginal, same thing. 90. I can sell the thing for 200. Now, it says someone comes along and says to you, will you make 50 bikes for us at £120 each, or 100 bikes at £80? Don't be fooled. This person is offering you £80. You still have to make the bike. So if you start making 100 bikes for someone and you're going to receive 80, and it's going to cost you 90 to make it, because that's what it costs to make the bike, you're making a loss of £10 on every bike. So don't suddenly think, oh, 100 times 80 is 800. Well, you still have to make the bike, and it's £90 to make a bike. Here, the person is offering you 120, it's 90 to make a bike. So if the person is offering you 120 and it's 90 to make a bike, you're making 30 on every bike. So 30 times 50, so you're making overall 150 pounds on the 50 bikes, right? Oh, sorry, 1,500. Forgive me. 30 times 50 is 1,500. You're making 1,500 on the 50 bikes. So that's kind of how we look at this, right? And what really, what if you look on the next page, on page 397, they just kind of give you the full picture of what happens when you were first of all just making 100 bikes, and you can actually see what happens that if you choose to make the 50 bikes extra at £120, you can see page 397. You've got the first 100 bikes in there. When you make the the extra 50 bikes, you have this. You can please look carefully. You can see 50 bikes at 120. That's 6,000. So you have the 20,000. Then you have the 6,000. And of course you have the direct labor and the direct labor of making those bikes, the 100 bikes and the extra 50. So really, there's the variable cost of making 150 bikes, right? It's 150 times 90, really, overall. Look at that. The fixed costs stay the same throughout. They aren't changing, which is why we ignore them when making this decision. But overall, it doesn't matter. You can do the whole thing. And when you look at what's going on with the existing bikes, if you choose to go for the £80 version, look at what happens overall. You're making £8,000, but look at the costs. The costs of £18,000 overall reduce your profit even from when you were making 100 bikes. So what you have in the end, you have this 6,000 for 100 bikes, 6,000, 7,500, and 5,000. So you're actually making a loss by taking on. If you take on the project at £80, where you're receiving £80, you're making a loss of £10 on every additional bike, right? And that shouldn't be too tricky to see, because this person is offering you, he's saying to you, make me 100 bikes at £80. Really, he's saying, make me 100 bikes at a loss of £10. That's overall a loss of £1,000. You were making £6,000 before, so you're now subtracting a loss of £1,000 from that, and that's why you have £5,000. Right, overall. So those are the key points, really, in terms of the maths of what's going on. So let's look at the rules. So generally, the key point is that additional work should contribute towards profit. Should contribute towards profit. So when that means it should contribute, it means that what you're being offered must be greater than the marginal cost, or must be greater than the variable cost. You must have a contribution as a result. There must be spare capacity. And additional work can't start replacing the things you're currently making. And of course, you wouldn't sell it above. So when it says absorption cost, where we were selling the portion of chips at £20, or in this case where we're selling bicycles for £200, it won't be greater than these. It won't be greater. It can't be, because the whole idea is you're trying to gain some market share, right? Or keep a client, or lock a client in, something along those lines. Now, of course, the problems are if a customer finds out that someone else has paid £200 for a bike, and they found out that you've got this deal that you're selling to people for 120. They might come back and say, "Listen, we also want 120." Right? And those are some of the issues. And what you really could have is someone could come to you, buy it for 120, and then go out and sell it to people for much higher. So you want to be careful with how you plan this. But the key point really is that you don't want to affect your current contracts, and you can't possibly, because remember, the key point is that the people who you're charging £200 for are really your bread and butter. They're the ones helping you cover your fixed costs. So you don't want to upset them with this little contract, really. So you have to maintain that contract. So it's really a case of real spare capacity. People are just sitting around. They've done all the work for the main contracts. Well, as long as they're covering variable cost, you can have them if you like. Now, that's not to say that you can't even go below the variable cost. On some occasions, you can actually go lower than the variable cost, maybe just lower, so that you can do it. You can have a loss-leading sort of situation. But again, this occurs because you might be selling a range of products. So you have some products that you like. Remember in the last video, a couple of videos, I talked about the restaurant and the alcohol. be selling alcohol for much more, so you can be using alcohol to cover your variable cost. So you might be selling alcohol for a much higher price, so which makes it okay for you to go lower than variable cost on certain cheap items. Or why not even give them for free, because you know that the selling price over the variable cost of one product is so much higher than the selling price over the less than the variable cost for another product. So this increase here is covering for this decrease here by even much more. So when someone offers you anything free, you should be wondering, am I paying much more for something else? And sometimes you might just want to keep the skilled workforce, so that just for the period of time, you might just accept a loss just for that period of time so that you keep them on. So this typically happens when we have a recession, so to speak, and we want to keep our skilled workforce. Right, okay, great stuff. So that's an additional work. And we'll end on that video, and then I'll see you in the next video for another use, if you like, of marginal costing.